Welcome to Jefferson Liberty Radio, the voice of the state of Jefferson in the Central Valley. I'm Matthew, and I'm joined by Alan. Alan, you're back. You feeling better?
I'm back. Thank you.
Pat, still filling in for Aaron. Pat, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. This episode is sponsored by Owl Certified Safe and Lock. Owls offers locksmithing services and alarm systems for a range of applications, including burglary, fire, tamper, medical emergencies, and much more. Owls has been locally owned and managed in Modesto for nearly 70 years, and with thousands of loyal and satisfied customers, you can be sure Owls will meet and exceed your needs. For more information, call 1-800-700-4780 or go to owlsalarm.com. That's ALSALARM.com. Thank you so much to Owl Certified Safe and Lock for sponsoring our show. We have a great interview coming up. Alan, take it away.
Well, welcome, Jefferson Liberty Radio. All you folks out there. I'm sorry I missed last week, but Pat and Marie did such a great job that you probably won't miss them.
Oh, we won't miss them.
Anyway, we try to dig deep. We dig down to get deep to keep you on top of what's happening now. And we want to welcome Kevin McGary with the, is it Frederick Douglass?
Frederick Douglass Foundation.
Foundation, that's what I was looking for.
Yeah, yes, sir, Alan. It's a pleasure to be with you, and it's been a while since I had a chance to spend any time with you all up there at Jefferson. But I'm glad that we could at least meet this way, and so I'm honored to be here.
Oh, welcome, Kevin.
Well, we're certainly pleased to have you.
Yes.
Believe me.
Right.
We certainly enjoyed your visits to us. But first of all, can you give us a little idea about how you got involved with the Frederick Douglass Foundation?
Yeah. So I'm the chairman of the Frederick Douglass Foundation of California, and I was sort of recruited to open up a California chapter. I guess it was about 8 years ago, and it came by way of a book that I wrote that really sort of summarized the Obama presidency. And it was a book called Insanity. So it's a hybrid word, instant insanity, and put them together, it's Insanity. And so that book went viral a bit, and some folks out in DC had heard that I'd written a book, read it, appreciated it, and wanted me to consider being their California chapter. And after digging a little bit into the Honorable Frederick Douglass's background, learning more about history that I had either never known or forgotten, I was able to really appreciate who this great patriot, hero, statesman, and just a great American Frederick Douglass was. And I thought, boy, if I can just help people to understand who Douglass was, help them to relive some of his history and apply it to their current context, to our current context politically, perhaps we'll begin to see that there is a better way, that there's a different way to perceive civic engagement, politics, and leadership. And Frederick Douglass epitomized all of that. And so when I decided to become the chairman, and then we basically for the past 8 years have spent time going to different speaking events and churches, and really try to get people to understand more about Douglass and history, number one, and then try to do a juxtaposition with where we are politically here in America, and try to apply lessons from Douglass and some of the other honorable patriots back in the 19th century their life lessons to what we're enduring today. When you consider that what they went through, Douglass, of course, was born into slavery, so he wasn't sold in or anything like that. He was born into it, and he's a product of rape. His father was a white slave master and raped his mother, and he was a product of that. So when you consider what he went through and all of the pivots in his life, and at the end, how much of an honorable man with an incredible legacy he left, it really, really pales in comparison to what we're going through today. And yet we hear cries of, oh, social justice and you safe spaces and this and that. It's like, are you kidding me? What happened?
Exactly.
Isn't that the truth?
Yes.
So we need to learn lessons from history, and especially if we can reinvent history in a way that people can actually see the lives of these honorable patriots who lived in the worst times in our history, and see how they lived and came out on top, and how they actually loved and adored the flag. They draped themselves gleefully with the flag. They wanted to be Americans first. That's part of the story that came out with Douglass and Lincoln. And I know I'm jumping around here a little bit, but Abraham Lincoln, when he was, envisioning Emancipation Proclamation, he asked Douglass, he said, so, we're going to do this thing, and then we'll give you the opportunity to just go back and, to Africa and this and that. And he just kept rambling. And Douglass looked at him and he says, what are you talking about? We want to live in the freest place in the world. We understand now what the Constitution and Declaration are about. We are Americans. We want the American dream. No, we're not going back. And President Lincoln didn't understand that the American experiment, even though it was lived through the eyes of a slave, even a slave could understand the awesome upside to living in a country like this. And when you consider that, and you consider how people are spitting on the flag, stomping on the flag, burning the flag, hating the flag, you wear a flag hat now, they want to rip that off and call you a fascist. I mean, it's just so insane right now.
It is insane.
Absolutely. I remember when I was in school hearing about Frederick Douglass, but not to the extent that you have studied him and proclaimed him. There was even a movie series or TV series on Fox News about the Civil War, and they talk quite a bit about Frederick Douglass.
Yeah, Frederick Douglass. A lot of people don't really, they know the name. They know he was a black ex-slave. They know that he, if they know anything about him, they know that he worked with Abraham Lincoln, and he was.
Were they friends? I hear, I always knew them to be friends. Were they considered?
They were after they met. They were close. They were great
friends. Good. That's
and admirers of each other. I don't know if this is out of context, but if you don't mind, I mean, I could give everybody just a brief history of Douglass's life. I'll try to hit the high point.
Absolutely.
Oh, okay.
Please go ahead.
So Frederick Douglass was actually, again, born as a slave, born into slavery, product of rape. When he was born, he was immediately separated from his mother. So he really didn't get a chance to get to know his mother. He saw her a few times while he was a toddler, and but he never, he just didn't remember her too well. But he had the privilege of actually being raised by his grandmother. His grandmother was the actual the keeper for all of the kids, because they separate you from your mother immediately, so those bonds aren't there, and they put you in a sort of a communal living situation. So you're in there with a bunch of other kids. Some of them may be relatives, some may not. But his actual the older lady that was handling all the kids in this particular plantation was actually his grandmother, his biological grandmother. So he was raised by her until about age 6. And then he was sold, and he was sold into his first house. And it was actually providential for him because these people had never owned slave before. So they didn't know how to treat or mistreat, a slave, and especially a child slave. So they really brought Frederick Douglass as a playmate for little Tommy. And so he and Tommy were approximately the same ages. And so when Mom started to teach Tommy to read, she started to teach, little Frederick Douglass to read. And then one day, the husband came home and says, wait, what are you doing? And she says, well, I'm teaching the boys to read. Frederick's really catching on. He says, no. You can't teach a slave to read. If they learn how to read, they're no more good. They're no more good. They won't be good slaves. And little Frederick Douglass was there at the time. He heard all this, and he said, so the key to freedom, whether I'm actually physically in chains or not, and this is quite a mature thought for a 7-8-year-old, is to just be educated, learn how to read, learn how to enunciate. And so he really took that personally. He started to sneak down in the wee hours of the morning, and he felt that it was a divine hand of God that was teaching him and tutoring him how to read. And he started to read and really master his craft. Became such a good reader that he actually appealed to the slave owners when they wanted to go to church. He asked them, could he actually, teach, do Bible study or Sunday school with the slaves in the out in one of the shacks out on the property. And so, here you have this young kid teaching these older people. And it was really his point wasn't really to Bible study with them. His point was really to get them to learn how to read too, so they could be set free, at least in their minds, if not in, physically as well. And so he started that and, really gravitated towards, the Bible and biblical truth. And he became, an excellent reader and orator and enunciator. And he just, and then ultimately he began to do a lot of, self-published articles and this kind of thing, ultimately later on. But anyway, he escaped when he was he was probably 19, went to New York and worked as a longshoreman for a short period of time. And then they started the Fugitive Slave Act, they started to reclaim slaves as far north as New York. And then he went to Boston, New England states, was actually, sort of taken under the wings by a Northern Democrat family. And, and of course, Democrats do today what they did back then. They say, they sort of, these were an abolitionist Democrats at the time, but they really did want to sort of brainwash Douglass against ever becoming a Republican. So they said, look, the Republicans started this Constitution stuff, and then the Constitution, it says that you're 3/5 of a man, you're less than a man if you were to go to be a Republican. So they sort of took the 3/5 clause, took it out of context, fed it to Douglass. So all that time, he really thought, okay, I'm a Northern Democrat abolitionist. Then they started to reclaim as far north as New England, and then he went to Europe and did some work in Britain, did a lot of work spent a lot of time in Ireland. And then actually through his exploits in Ireland with publishing his works and sending them to the United States and that, he became well known. Folks in Ireland sponsored his freedom. They actually purchased his freedom. So he came back to America as a freed man. Then when he came back, he had the opportunity to continue to do some publishing. He started his own business, the North Star Publishing Company, and it was a magazine. It was more like a newspaper, but newspaper magazine type publishing entity. And he became very well known. And he had the opportunity to then go to meet President Lincoln. Showed up at the back door and wrote his name down on paper and says, "I'd like to spend time with President Lincoln, please." And they said, "Who are you?" And he says, "I'm Frederick Douglass." I gave him the card. You had to write your particulars on the card. And they were looking at, again, slavery was still very much going on, and you had this sort of dapper-looking young black man at the back door wanting to see the president. They didn't quite know what to make of that, but then he says, "Look, if you could just tell President Lincoln I'd like to spend some time with him. And they did, and they took his name there, and President Lincoln stood up from his desk and he says, Frederick Douglass is here? And they said, yeah, he's out, he's out back. He says, bring him in. So they brought him in, and he actually stood when Douglass entered the door. Here you have a president, when everybody, highly esteemed, the most highly esteemed person in America, he stands to show honor to the person that come in through the door, and it was an escaped slave and black man, and so I'm sure his Secret Service agents thought, what in the world is going on here? But anyway, he stood and he says, the Honorable Frederick Douglass, and Douglass gave him a similar type of rejoin by saying the Honorable President Lincoln, some of that effect. So they had mutual respect right off the bat. Lincoln had heard of him, had read his writings, and was very much.
I was wondering how he'd heard of him.
Yep.
So
thanks. Very much enamored with him, and then and so what happened was they spent some time together. He dug out his Emancipation Proclamation, said, "This is what I want to do," and then you slaves can go back to your motherland and live a good life. And Douglass wasn't having any of it. He says, "No, we're Americans. We'll fight with you and for you for the if we have to go to civil war for emancipation, we'll do that. We'll fight side by side. We want to be Americans. This is the land of the free. There's no other land." Now remember, Douglass went to Europe, and Europe was free at the time, because of all the work that Wilberforce had done in the early 1900s. When Douglass went there, they were very accepting of blacks, but he did get a chance to see parts of the world, and he, for him, America was the place, So they settled on that, and then Lincoln said, "Okay, good. Well, we'll do this, and we'll send it through Congress." And then Douglass said, "Oh, wait, Mr. President." He says, as well as I do, if you send this through Congress, there's going to be hundreds of thousands more slaves that'll be lynched, maimed, killed, raped. He says, this is the single most important executive order that you can do. Lincoln heeded his admonition, and he actually signed Emancipation Proclamation as a executive order. Then, of course, the ensuing Civil War, but Douglass was a recruiter for the black regiment in the Civil War. He also worked hand in hand with Harriet Tubman. He also worked hand in hand with Sojourner Truth, and he worked with Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton and the women's rights movement. He's all of the civil rights movements, the women's rights, the civil rights, all the other rights movements actually pivoted off of Douglass. It was him who unleashed it. And that's a pretty amazing time for one man to basically give everybody in that era hope, encouragement, and actually help them to succeed in their relative ministries that they were at the time setting the captives free. So it was Douglass who was the main pivot in that, and the main cog in that wheel. And of course, he had the ear of the president. So he was the one that had all of the cachet, if you will, for making things happen.
Well, God certainly blessed us with Frederick Douglass, didn't he?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Yeah, he was also a very good orator.
Absolutely. He was an excellent speaker, and spoke at the World's Fair in Chicago, and did a lot of work, speaking and writing works. And so he was famous for that. He was one of the first African-American, he was the first African-American multimillionaire. His estate was probably worth about $10 million in today's dollars. When he died, he was the first African-American ambassador, the first African-American to be named to a presidential ticket. He was signed on as a vice presidential candidate on, it was Freedom Party, and one of the tickets back then. He was the first African American in the Marshal's office, U.S. Marshal's office, first African American bank president, ambassador to Haiti. Let's see what else. He was held in state upon his death as well. Rotunda. So I mean, there's a lot of firsts, and he was the most photographed person in the 19th century. So When you consider that you had Ulysses S. Grant, you had Abraham Lincoln, you had all kinds of really great, formidable patriots in the 19th century, and here you have Douglass being the most photographed person during that time.
Wow.
That's incredible.
Very good history. Thank you so much.
He lived into the 20th century, didn't he?
He died in 1895.
Oh, close.
Close.
Pretty close. Yeah.
Well, that's a very inspiring story, and I thank you for it.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I'd like to move on a little bit. You wrote a book called Just, Justly, and Justice.
Mm-hmm.
Did you wrote that after you became chair of the Frederick Douglass Foundation, didn't you?
Yes, I did. And so that was written probably, I guess it was 4 years ago. And the reason why I was inspired to write that book is because we started to hear a whole lot about social justice. Some churches even propping up saying we're social justice churches.
Yeah, that's so true.
And so when we start hearing all these distinctions that come out of nowhere being thrown around, I thought, well, what is that really? What are people really saying? And I started to do some work and some research in that. And so there was social justice, racial justice, and human rights, and everybody was really pivoting their entire political context and leanings based upon that. Well, if we do that, then there's only one party that continues to parrot those phrases, and then we'd all be, subjected to that one party. And I thought, well, it would be a disaster if we just believe these words that these people are saying without really understanding what they're saying. So, I started to do some research and looked into. First of all, I had to define what is justice. What is justice really? It was really interesting because if you go back to the early 20th century, we had some horrible despots that were using the same terms. You had Hitler saying our cause is a cause for justice, and he actually had people marching around, as propagandists, but during his speeches, with placards saying Hitler is for social justice. No, social justice is not a new term; it's actually been used, for about 100 or so years, and some of the worst despots in history used that term or derivatives thereof. Stalin, Hitler, Mao, Mussolini even used, that their cause was for justice. And so you look at that and you look at, gosh, how could all of these horrible, evil, manifestly evil despots use a term like justice while annihilating about 100 million souls? And you then begin to realize that whenever you have terms like that are nebulous, that are not defined, then they can be easily changed over time. So you had these people that were propagandists, but they were cunning and very well spoken, who could gin up a crowd and use those terms and actually convince the crowd that they are a justice candidate, or that they're a person out for justice, and then pursue justice at the end of a sword if need be. And that's unfortunately what happened to a lot of tens of millions of people. And so when I started to do that, you look at that, and then I saw all the carnage that left behind by the whole justice movement and all the derivatives. I thought, well, we need to define it for today. So I went to the human rights, racial justice, and social justice websites that I could find. And essentially what it came down to, if you were to try to distill all of their definitions for what justice is simply the act of allowing another to live side by side with you. I thought, well, that's really interesting. That I could go with that. Yeah, because when you actually start to look at what justice is with that definition, none of these agencies, organizations that proclaim to be justice organizations actually live up to that tenet. They do not allow others to just simply live side by side with them. And the biggest tell on that is they are all pro-abortion, all 100% of them.
Yep.
They're leftist organizations and they're pro-abortion. They're not allowing anyone else to just simply live side by side. They're purposely precipitating the snuffing out of any other people living side by side with them. And so this book really goes through that, goes through some biblical definitions of what justice is and some examples of how that plays out over time. And at the end of it, it's really multiple talking points that are pointing to what the left or, leftists would call justice movements, including, LGBTQ and women's rights and women's marches and social justice, and none of them are honoring life. Not a single one.
Yeah, that's so true.
And so they're manifestly unjust. The problem is that we have millennials that are being raised in this generation, and they're being really horribly manipulated by professors and their teachers. And so getting the message out about what justice is and what it's not, and if you're really for justice, then you really have to sort of stand on this side and on the side of life, because Dr. Martin Luther King had a real nice phrase that he coined. He says, "Look, injustice anywhere leads to injustice everywhere." So if we were to just cavalierly say, well, okay, beyond the life issue, this is a justice, but no, you can't. Injustice anywhere. If you allow the core of injustice to exist, then that leads to injustice everywhere. You can't say, oh, I'm just in these realms, but not in the life. No, there's no such thing. So we need to be a little bit more proactive in helping people to understand what justice is and what it's not, and helping them to understand that they're being manipulated and abused really by these organizations that are taking advantage of their psyche.
Yeah, that's great. And I had a chance to peruse your book a little bit. Thank goodness to Pat, who loaned me her copy.
It was I will never look at the words justly, justice. I will never look at those words the same way.
Yeah, okay.
I will. Thanks to you.
Oh,
well,
good. Awesome.
We're going to allow you a shameless plug to tell us how our listeners could get a copy from you.
Okay, well, the easiest way at this point would be to just go to Amazon and put in my name, and it's justly justice. And of course, it's a play on words, but the reason why I use that is because what we're really looking for, everybody desires justice. It doesn't matter time, space, culture, wherever you are on the planet, it doesn't matter. Societal, everybody wants justice. And so it's one of those innate characteristics that God put in each of us to yearn for justice, right? So,
yeah,
right.
Exactly.
So what we really want is we just want justly justice, not social justice earlier. We really want just justly justice, right? So that's how the name is what it is. But anyway, so the easiest, most expeditious way is just go to Amazon and put in my name, and it's justly justice, and they'll get you some copies.
Good.
Yeah, and the author is Kevin McGary.
Mm-hmm. Kevin McGary.
We'll have that on the site we'll have his name on when we put this out.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, let's switch a little bit to something more recent here. I understand that you had some influence in the bathroom use issue down in Texas.
We did.
I have
Okay.
heard this story many times, but I will never get tired of hearing it. Please tell us that story, Kevin.
Yeah, it was an incredible opportunity for us to participate in it was really a pressing issue. This was the last year or two of the Obama administration, and he was really pushing hard for this gender neutral thing where, you go to 24 Fitness and you'd be in there with women and vice versa. And it just, and so we had some states like, I think it was North Carolina and certainly Texas, it was Houston, the city of Houston, that were really taking this thing seriously, this whole gender neutral thing. And they started to say, this is not just for schools, but this is, we want to make this pervasive throughout Houston. They had just elected a homosexual mayor, lesbian mayor as well, and she really, really pushed it. And so, and so, essentially, the city said, "Well, you can't unilaterally do this. Let's at least bring it up for a vote." And so they decided to put it on the ballot, and it looked like it was going to pass. I mean, there were so many people that were asleep, and especially people of faith. They didn't understand what the bill allowed, what it didn't allow. They weren't plugged in, and so when we did the preliminary polling on it 3 weeks prior, it looked like it was going to win by about 10 points, and we said, no, this can't stand. So we at the Frederick Douglass Foundation and the Douglass Leadership Institute, which is the educational arm of what we do, we actually sent down a team of 12 people. And we camped them out there for 3 weeks. And what our strategy was to really activate the church, activate churches. And so we went to all of the major Houston churches, especially the urban churches, because we figured, there's probably a good percentage of the other voters that are sort of tuned in. But we kind of speculated that the urban churches, probably weren't paying too much attention. It was an off year, not too much happening, and this one proposition or this one ballot measure comes up, and it could easily pass if they had fallen asleep. So we spent time with the Black church and went in there, Black and Hispanic churches, and we told them exactly what the bill would allow, basically allowing their little girls to take showers with 16, 17-year-old football players, if need be, And so we gave them a couple examples of where this would apply and how this would work, or their wives, their mothers, their grandmothers, having to be subjected to, no privacy in their showers and when they work out the Y or whatever. And as we went through this, and people's, really became incensed, and the churches got engaged. And we started to see the needle turn. And so we actually had a team going into also all of the high rises, because we wanted to make sure that the entire urban community there was awake on this issue. And so we also had a strategy go into, the high rise apartments and that had, low income type families in it, in urban areas within Houston. We went in those and we started to walk doors and go door to door. But one of our teams was actually on the corner waiting for one of the other folks who were already up in the high rise going door to door to come back. And he was basically surrounded. There was 2 or 3, gang looking guys, right? And they came up and they said, "Hey, what are you doing? What's up?" And he says, "Well, we've got this initiative. We're just making sure that everybody's aware of what's going on." And one guy says, "What are you talking about? What are you doing? You're not from this area." And he was about to start harassing. He said, No. Let me tell you what this deal is. And so he explained the bill to him, and then he used an example. He says, "Is that your little girl right there?" And he says, "Yeah, that's my daughter. She's 6." And he said, "Okay, well, that's a perfect age. Well, what if your daughter, at her little school, had to be subjected to using the exact same restroom as the little boys, right in the next stall or, right next to her." And he was like, "Oh, come on, man." And then he read the bill and he says, "Oh, no, this is not happening. Not in Houston." So he took the paraphernalia, the materials we had, and the sign-up sheets. And he says, no, we're going to make this happen. And he and a couple other guys that were with him, they went door to door and knocking on doors and saying, no, y'all need to wake up on this. This is a major issue. And, so they worked with us the rest of the night, and we got the vote out, and we actually won it by over 10 points. So it was a pretty major accomplishment.
I'll say. Very good. Very good.
Now, the other thing that's interesting is we find ourselves now at a time when that's I really think that with what we've seen in this past election, that's the kind of thing, that's the kind of community engagement we're going to need to do again. Because really, as we come up on 2020, we're going to hear a lot more negative messaging, obviously, from the media and the professors and the other known Marxists in our public spheres that are going to be denouncing pretty much everything that Trump does. But more importantly, they're going to continue to use against any and all other candidates as race card. So if you're a Republican, you're automatically a de facto racist, is what they want to fully ingrain in people's mind. And what we're going to need to do is to engage those communities. We're going to need to encourage them with a different way of thinking. And the only way that we're going to change those mindsets is to actually do work in those communities and help them to see that they're being manipulated. And so we at the Frederick Douglass Foundation, Douglass Leadership Institute, we're finishing up crafting our strategy for. We're going to start right away because we really have a short runway. I mean, got about 20 months to really make some hearts and minds change before 2020 elections in November. So we're starting right away, right after the first of the year, and we're going to have our teams spread throughout our battleground areas. But really, we need to go to all areas, and especially the urban churches. And get them involved.
Very good.
If we were to get here in California, a lot of people think that we're a lost cause. I fundamentally think that we're a lost cause too if we allow things to continue to go as they have been. But if we employ a different strategy for engaging churches, here's the issue.
Church is very good. I'm glad you're going to go here.
Yeah, the reason why I'm saying churches is because that's the only sector that I see that is not completely inundated and infiltrated and overwhelmed and already voting. The reality is that you have about 50% of people in churches that are registered, and of the 50%, about 25% vote on any given election. So you have about a 25% turnout on elections with the church body. With Trump, I think it was a little less than 40. When he won this election in 2016. But I do believe that we need to approach, because of the cheating, because of the illegal voting from illegal voters, because of all of the Marxist and racist, calls that are continual, we need to activate the church body and get another 10, 15% voting biblically. And if we do that, we can overcome, we could even turn California red if we were to do that. Now, here, bear with me for one more second. I know you want to say. Bear with me. Let me give you the perfect case in point. Case in point is Gavin Newsom won in California by, I think he had 4.6 or 4. I don't know how many million votes he had. But what number of that do you actually think were people of faith by their own assessment and gleefully voted for Gavin over Cox?
Do you have that number?
I don't have the number, but I would assume, because that 4.6 million voters, average person of faith in California, I would assume it's probably 70, maybe 80% that are professed people of faith. It doesn't matter what faith. I'm not saying Christian, or some of them could be Muslim, some of them could be other faiths. I'm just saying of faith, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And then if you look at that, what difference would it have made if all of the synagogues, all of the churches all of the mosques would have just done one thing, which was constantly remind their parishioners leading up to the election that, they didn't even have to take a side. All they had to do is say, I just want to remind us as part of this gathering that, remember, Gavin Newsom was the guy who undermined our votes in Prop 8. Gavin Newsom was the guy who unleashed across the United States same-sex marriage, homosexual marriage. Gavin Newsom was the guy who actually unleashed gender confusion across the country. It started with him when he was mayor of San Francisco. And we had the vote, and he says, I don't care I'll screw the church. I don't care what you guys voted. I'm going to start marrying people next week. And he did. And so all they had to do, they didn't have to take a side. They didn't even have to be heavy-handed with it. They say, if they had just done that, we could have had a Republican governor. Because I think people would have said, why would we reward this guy? He came against our faith. He came against our fundamental religious beliefs. He's not for us. Why would we vote for a guy like that? But they didn't do it. So all I'm saying is, I think if we get into our churches and we actually message appropriately, truthfully about, truth, about race, and some of these even more controversial subjects, progressivism, basically the church needs to understand what progressivism is. They need to understand fundamentally that it's demonic. Now, I go through a workshop and I take people in about an hour I deconstruct progressivism. Historically, biblically, I take it apart. And then I reconstruct where it's done its devastation. And at the end of it, you have a whole different perception of what progressivism is. I do the same thing with socialism and economic philosophies, economic and political. So I do the same thing with socialism and Marxism and communism, and I juxtapose it to free markets and capitalism. And I demonstrate biblically, after deconstructing, that these are demonic. They actually come from a demonic root. And it's inexcusable. I mean, it's easy to see once you sort of go through and you do the research and you start connecting the dots. But we would need to be passionate about doing that kind of work and getting our churches involved in seeing the truth. And if we're to do something like that, we could actually turn California around and the United States.
I believe you're right. I believe you're right about that, Kevin. So what are you proposing to do? I mean, just get in and talk to the pastors, to the preachers. How are you going to approach it? Or how do you approach it?
So,
I mean, getting that vote out, that spiritual vote.
So here's the thing that I think we all need to do. I think it would be very, very important for people of faith to get to confirm with their pastors, leaders, that what's missing right now for the church in general is civic engagement. And that's missed opportunities because our state is really suffering as a result of being so one-sided. So we can say it like that, our state is being run so one-sided. We have supermajorities. Eventually they're going to come after the church again. We'll see another bill come out like 2943 that will prohibit churches from talking and ministering and providing therapeutic advice to people who may want to come out of a different lifestyle. And so if we could help our pastors to see that threat is real, it's imminent, and I know it's coming. I mean, I'm just, for me, it's coming. So, and the only thing that we can do to thwart it is with our votes. And so we have, 2 years to get our churches, first of all, involved civically. So that means that the pastor has to start taking a stand and says, look, we have a state that we know and love. we have things going on in our state, high taxation and people needing to move and fires and those types of things, because we're one party state. We've been run by one side, and it's just no balance in our legislature at the moment. And so our church body needs to give 100% participation with voting, and just encourage that. And then as we get closer to 2019, mid 2019, we could start talking about. As we get to early 2020, we can start talking about voting biblically. Right now, we just need to make sure we get everybody registered. Everybody who's a member, part of being a member is you're going to participate civically, because that's part of our role and mandate. And if you have some pastors that don't see it like that, please get me involved. I have several scriptures I go to that show them that that's clearly that God gives us the mandate to do it.
One of the issues that I have seen is that a lot of pastors are afraid to get in the pulpit and talk about issues of that involve government, and because they're afraid they're going to lose their tax status.
Yeah, that's not going to happen. So only if you're advocating, and even at that, we've tried it. Churches have come together across the country and have had these political Sundays. I forgot what they actually called them, but they've actually preached political messages over the pulpit in mass, and dared the government to do anything about it for the past several years. But so only if you advocate for one side or the other. This is not any of that. This is just saying, me as a pastor, one of the things that we have to be aware of is that we live in a society. Our society is being run by people who may not necessarily align with what we believe biblically. And first of all, I'd like to make sure that we all participate civically so we can have a potential voice or be at the table. And when I say be at the table, I'd like you as my parishioners to really seriously think about running for a local office, school board, city council, whatever, because we need more people of faith who believe the way we do at the table, so we could start to, put forth good legislation and start to at least, stall some of the bad legislation that can begin to impact our children, begin to impact our communities, begin to impact our livelihood by virtue of this fire. We see what, horrible environmental policy will do if we don't have alternate voices at the table. So I think you could make that argument to your churches and parishioners in a way that just gets them engaged. Right now the church is absolutely asleep, and they think that, just praying and just sitting in the pews and singing Kumbaya and the great by and by, that God's going to work a miracle on our behalf. God gives us the capacity and the responsibility to represent him in the earth in every domain. Every domain. So
true.
Right now, we're not in every domain. We've run away from the political domain.
Boy.
And we have to get our churches and our pastors back looking at what will have an impact on our culture and society. And certainly going to church and being a good Christian and all that helps. But what impacts culture and society even more than that is if we are at the table with lawmakers, decision makers, leaders, and we're having an impact. If we are in the Supreme Court is so vitally important, and President Trump has done such an excellent job there, because now we actually have principled men of faith who are principled in the Constitution. We have more of them than less. And, culture is the downstream of politics. It's what happens if you have a completely leftist court that we had for those over a decade or so. Then we get these crazy, ex-gender bills and that are supported and encouraged by the courts. And once the Supreme Court puts us in imprimatur on these crazy, new social experiments, that's it, done.
Yep.
And the only way that we could stave that or save that is if we, as Christians, as people of faith, get involved ourselves. Now, I've been up to Stanislaus County and your Jefferson team. You have a lot of very, very brilliant people there. And, they're also brilliant people and committed to faith as well. We need to be, we need to be running. We need to throw our hat in and just start doing stuff. Because we when we don't run, when we don't make ourselves available, when we're not civically engaged, we basically ceded that territory to those who hate us, who would like a world without us, who hate our faith. So, that's my point.
That's perfect. That's exactly where we need to be going.
Very similar to the class that you and Alan, you and I took this summer.
That's right.
The teacher spoke exactly what you're saying. How we need to get the churches to vote and vote principles.
Yep. Vote, and so some people say vote your values, and I say no. There's so many people that are so messed up with their values. I say vote the word of God, period. It doesn't matter what my values are.
Yes.
My value may have been, I want a black man in office. And so if that's my value, I'm going to vote that with no regard for biblical truth on that vote. So no, that's not the right message. The vote is vote God, vote his word, vote his principles. If we so much as say we have given our life to him through Jesus, then guess what? He's the ultimate authority, and so we just vote his way, period. Take ourselves out of it.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Good.
Kevin, I want to delve into one last topic before we end this wonderful conversation. We're a group that is working on whose goal is for the creation of the state of Jefferson. And I'm curious, do you think that the state of Jefferson will be successfully created? And if so, would you move there?
I don't. So first of all, we've had a number of initiatives over the past 3 years trying to get the state better represented. We've had a couple of liberal leftist activists going in their pursuits, trying to break it up 3-4 different ways. And State of Jefferson, we've been smacked down. We were doing pretty good in the courts, and then we kind of got smacked a little bit.
May I interrupt you for just a second, Kevin? You are a plaintiff on the State of Jefferson lawsuit. Is that right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. So
I wanted to know that.
If we could, I'm all in. I'm just a little wary now. Now we got a supermajority of people who hate us and are not really necessarily going to see it our way. You got the state of New California. That's another initiative.
We have to just keep fighting. We just cannot give up. That's the way I'm going to look at it.
Well, and we should, and we have to keep fighting. But if you're asking me candidly, do I think it will happen? Even if we were to get it passed in California, if God by His grace gave us a miracle and we had a pathway to do it here in the state, I think it would have to be approved by the federal government.
It's Article 4, Section 3, state split, so it would have to go to to Congress.
Right.
Yeah, it has to go to Congress, but first it has to pass the California legislature.
Yes.
We have so many people. So, the way I look at it is even people that we thought were good Congress people are just we've got so many messed up people. They're just not principally motivated anymore, and they're really going in. They're throwing in with leftist thinking and in some ways leftist ideology. And I was listening to what's happening with the environmental movement. I mean, with the what do you call? Not the environment. Well, yeah, it's the environmental movement, but it's global warming and this report that came out, and we have now some of the folks that you would think would be conservative, that at least try to say that they are conservatives. They're throwing in, well, I don't know to what degree, obviously, man-made global warming is real. I don't know what to, and I'm like, what? What do you? I mean, what? Really? Ugh.
Yeah.
And so we have so many people that are so messed up right now. Even our legislators and our people in Congress. I don't know.
It is confusing to me as to why they do that. We're dealing with a lot of that here in locally with our own Republican Party. So
yeah, that's what I'm saying. Republican parties. They're acting like it's just crazy. I'm thinking.
As I was told, the concept of global warming, man-made, is the height of egotism.
It is.
Oh, that's very good, Alan. I agree with that.
I agree with that 100%. And that's exactly what it is. What they want to do is to ignore the history of the world and God's involvement in it. We've always had climate change, of course. It's a natural, cycles.
Sure.
We've had warming, cooling periods, and even before men even existed, when we had dinosaurs and other beasts roaming the earth, we've had periods where it was warm and cool, and their extinction was a result of some of that extreme temperature. So for us to be arrogant enough to think that, well, we're the ones causing it and that we can actually correct it, when this is God's creation. He knows what He created the all of the seasons and cycles. And for us to be arrogant enough to think that we can actually change it, they're actually talking about trying to tint parts of the sun.
I heard that today. I just about fell off my chair when I heard that.
The height of arrogance to think that you know how big the sun is. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
And you're going to put chemicals up there after berating us for years, talking about we've depleted the ozone because of our chemicals. You're actually going to shoot chemicals up. It's just so bizarrely insane.
And
Amen.
Who believes that? The people who believe this stuff, I just like banging my head against the wall trying to get them to, exactly. Trying to get them to understand how wrong that is. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what, Kevin, you are so well spoken, and you've done such a terrific job of presenting the Frederick Douglass Foundation and your book. We couldn't thank you enough for this time that you've spent with us.
One thing I do want you, if we get to have you on again, which I'm hoping we do, I want you to talk about what you've done when you go into the inner city churches, and because that is another fantastic story that you have, and I would really like you to expand on that, especially. So that we'll keep that in mind next time you come, because are we running out of time?
Yes, we are.
So, okay. I can't see the timer. Okay.
Gladly, we'll do that. We'll do it another time. Invite me back, and we'll take you through that. And
Kevin,
so we've
definitely going to do that.
I'm hopeful that of people that hear this podcast, this message, that we get serious about our biggest demographic right now. If we're going to make a change in our own state, are the churches.
Amen.
Have a ripe harvest. It's huge. 75% are not voting in any particular election.
That just blows my mind.
A lot of people we can address.
Yep.
we just get them voting and get them voting biblically, we could actually turn the state around, and we could actually really surprise the leftists and actually win in 2020. But we need to get to work.
Yeah.
Yes.
And right away.
Right away.
Right away.
Agree, Alan.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.
I really appreciate
Thanks
it.
so much, Kevin.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me, and looking forward to next time.
We'll do it
great.
again.
Thanks again, Kevin.
God bless you now.
God bless
God
you.
bless you too. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now. Okay, upcoming meetings for the Stanislaus Concerned Citizens. December 5th, we'll be at the Grizzly Rock Cafe. That'll be at 6:30, and that'll be December 5th. Where do you fit in with the state of Jefferson? How we're going to move forward in the upcoming 2019 year. On December 12th, we have a guest speaker, Jake Wenger, who is a former MID director, and he'll be there to speak to us on the water issues. Excellent meeting. You won't want to miss it. So that's all we've got for the rest of the year.
Thank you so much to Kevin for coming on to our show. We really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule, Kevin. If you're interested in sponsoring our show, you can head over to jeffersonlibertyradio.com or email us at sponsors@jeffersonlibertyradio.com. We'd love to hear from you, from our listeners. Email us at feedback@jeffersonlibertyradio.com or via our website, again, jeffersonlibertyradio.com. We'd love to hear your questions and comments. Don't forget to subscribe to us in iTunes. You can leave us a 5-star review. We'd really, really appreciate it, and it really helps our ratings. You can also find us on the typical social media, Facebook, Twitter, also Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and even some alternative media such as BitChute and Gab. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Jefferson Liberty Radio, and we will catch you next episode.